So good morning.
Morning.
Any questions from last week before we get started?
I was just trying to refresh my memory on it, but
So we talked about, objectives, requirements, planning, tracking, and hadn't quite got into the tracking yet, right? We were talking about objectives, so we left on the point of scheduling, right?
right. That's what I've got. Just start looking at it again.
So we talked about the objectives and the requirements and the triple constraints, and talked about planning all the pieces to that, and estimating costs and budget, resources, and this is as far as we got. So, any questions, comments? Okay. One of the people that was here last week said that she really it was interesting to find out about the multitasking.
Yes, that was a good takeaway.
Actually, that's helped me over the past month. It's helped me at work. I've been blocking out time. Usually, I'm always like watching my email on the left of my screen, and got rid of that. Work for blocks of time and getting a lot more done. So
Makes a difference, doesn't it?
It does make a difference. Yeah, my inbox is slightly messier, but I'm getting more important stuff completed. So
Sometimes it doesn't take much. Just a simple concept like that.
Yeah, it's helpful.
So, next thing we're going to talk about, and as you know, I reiterate risk throughout this. Talk a lot about risk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? First of all, identifying what risk is, and everything has a certain amount of variation, right? That's normal. It goes up and down, and you got to take that variation out. It's when it goes beyond normal variation that it becomes a risk, right? And that's something that needs to be considered. A lot of people, if the needle moves, oh my gosh, but so what? Some days it's warmer, some days it's colder. It's variation. Time. Do you have the time to do this? Organizations, say, oh, gee, I want to do this project, but do they have the time to do it? And the labor, the budget to do it? If not, what's the risk involved in completing the project? How far do you want to get into the project before you say, hey, we can't finish this because we didn't consider the impact that we were going to have on it, right? We'll talk about potential delays as we talk about some other things, what can cause delays, okay? Suppliers, labor, having the right talent in the right place, There are a lot of things that can cause a delay, and how do you deal with the risk? And if you don't think about it ahead of time and plan for it, this is probably the biggest factor that has projects go south. Projects that fail, can't complete it because they didn't do a good risk assessment. Okay. One of the things we'll talk about coming up is scope management, change management. That's the second biggest factor of projects going south. Okay, but risk is really important, and it doesn't take much just to think about the different things that could go wrong, and as you're experiencing, how do you get your labor productive, versus spending a lot of time spinning their wheels. So, project process, tracking communications, reports, change control, termination. So if we look at tracking, let's look at tools first. So, tools. There are a lot of tools available to project managers. People don't think about them. And we're going to talk about tools next month. Okay? And I got a handy dandy little tool book. There's software. Most software deals with Gantt charts, and it deals with critical path. There are some critical chain plugins and there are critical chain software as well. Some of the tools, affinity diagram, brainstorming concepts. And brainstorming isn't just getting together in a bunch of people, it's programming the process so that you're successful. There are fishbone diagrams, control charts. Control charts are mostly used in production environments, but you can use them in project management as well. It helps you to determine where that variation is. Flow charts, histograms, interrelationship diagrams, matrix diagrams, just all kinds of tools that help you budget, help you plan, determine what priorities. All these are just tools to help you think through the process that we've covered already. In that being, then, you know, we get into tracking and monitoring. And this is kind of critical. So, work completion, we talked a little bit about that last time. You know, I'm 40% done. How do you know you're 40% done? You know, what's the measurement? How do you determine that? You know, it's often where, gee, I'm at 80% done, and it took 20% of the time, and then the last 20% takes 80% of the time, because, you know, we don't have a measurement. I like to be either done or not done. Okay. Now sometimes you can do a little of each. Okay, where you have a project and this piece is done, this piece isn't. So that's, if you can recognize it definitively, you can say, hey, half that job is done. But other than that, you really don't know, right? Are you on time? How's your schedule coming? You know, this is where some of the software comes in. The Gantt charts shows you your progress, and the progress is where you should be, right, versus where you are. And by using your work completion, you can tell. Okay. Same thing, cost. Now, cost can get a little tricky because in some cases you might get a good deal on material, and you may buy ahead. Okay. So at this point in time in the project, it looks like you're over budget, but you're really not, right? And again, monitoring your risk. You know, gee, we had a flash flood. Yeah, weren't counting on that. Something happened. But being able to report the anomalies, okay, tracking and describing that is real important, because management people need to know, but you need to know too. It's a little bit like flying in a sense that, you know, we do fuel management, you know, between headwinds and other factors, you know, we're managing our fuel. You know, we burn so much an hour, and depending upon how far we make it, we have to determine, gee, maybe we should land and get some more, or maybe we can make it. You know, I took a trip from here to Eugene one time in an airplane. It took us 4.5 hours. You know, we were watching that fuel flow really close. It only took us 2.5 hours to get back, but it was all that headwind, that risk of, you know, how much headwind, right?
What do you do when you're working for a client and you don't necessarily want your client to know, like what's the industry norm, or how do you handle if you hit a snag that's unexpected and you have to adjust schedules and stuff? Do you like to keep your clients pretty close to that information so that they know what to expect, or how do you?
There are a couple of ways to do that, and we'll talk about change control, which, you know, that's kind of what handles that and all that thing. Plus, we talked earlier last week about contingency, so you can build in a little contingency. Contingency can not only be dollars, it could be time, it could be, you know, other factors that you build into that to weather that, right?
Yeah.
That's where critical chain project management comes in, because you actually build in the buffers in your schedule for those kinds of things.
Yeah.
It makes it, smooths it out.
And then do you report periodically to your client, here's where we're at on the schedule, and we're using some contingency here?
Yes. You know, and you know, you put that in and say, okay, we've used up part of our contingency, or we've done this, you know. And we'll talk more about reporting right now. So, one of the things that's important is not only reporting, but communicating, okay? I love to use dashboards, okay? And you can be very creative with dashboards, but you gotta tell the story like it is, okay? So, I brought an example. This was the project that I did, and all these little, this is a map, and all these little spots represented part of the project. And when we started, they were all red. As we finished them, this map started turning green. And the CEO of the company, every time we had a meeting, the first thing he came was looked at the map,
Right.
you know? It's very telling, you know?
Yeah.
And that's one technique, you know, where you're doing.
So that's on the dashboard. You associate that with the dashboard?
This is part of my dashboard.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. It wasn't my only part, because part of this is telling me, you know, how successful we're being
Right.
as we're moving stuff across the country. And we didn't do it from left to right, or, you know.
Right.
But the other part of the dashboard is, okay, where are we in schedule? Where are we on budget? And this is where you annotate, you know, okay, we used up some of our contingency, or we had a
Right.
factor that we didn't know about, right?
Okay.
But you can be very creative, and you can use
Yeah.
charts, barcodes, you know, all kinds of ways to make it, and the more visible it is, the better it is, okay?
Yeah.
And you want to, in this communication, you want to explain your progress, your spending and budget, and of course the risk. When you run into something, okay, hey, you know, but again, if it's a risk you plan for, okay, you can say, hey, we did that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some discussion about project management is, can you use your contingency for a risk you haven't planned for versus one you plan for?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. My feeling is, yeah, that's what that is.
Okay.
Okay. Some project managers say, well, no, you can't. If it was an unplanned risk that
Right.
occurred, you can't use your contingency.
Because you may need it for the risk that you were planning on mitigating.
But a risk you plan may not happen,
Right.
and so it kind
That's
of
why it's a contingency.
blends itself, right?
Yeah. Makes sense.
So this is probably one of the primary things a project manager really has to do, other than manage the project, is report. Making sure that the management team, the sponsors, the stakeholders know what's going on. And the timeliness of it is important, you know, depending upon the length of the project. In some cases it's a daily, some cases weekly, bi-monthly. It could be, you know, monthly or whatever, but it has to be timely, so that as something occurs in the project, the stakeholders and the management are aware of what's going on. They don't find out weeks later that, oh, by the way,
Right.
we changed the color. You know?
Right. Right.
So do you do that on a plan basis, and then
Yeah,
as things happen, then update?
as you develop the project,
Okay.
you would say, okay, we need to report weekly or whatever it is. You define that up front, and then, you know, get the management. Now, one of the things that's often difficult for a project manager is get the management to come to the meeting, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's really important. This was a $60 million project,
Mm-hmm.
and the CEO and the senior vice presidents were all involved.
Right.
And when we had a meeting, they all showed up.
Right. Right. It's pretty vested.
But some of the other meetings, some of the other projects that, you know, are only a few bucks, you know, it's still important they get there. You know, and it's also important that you provide the information even if they don't come. Okay? This was kind of fun.
Yeah, I like that.
I did it in Photoshop, and And I made this thing at the end as gifts to the management team.
Oh, did you really? Okay. So it wasn't in this thing when you were
Yeah.
presenting.
So it's just a piece of paper,
Yeah.
you know, every week.
Right.
And some of them were bigger than others, you know.
Yeah.
But then I put that together as a gift to each of the
People that helped.
key people on the team.
Yeah.
Of course, I kept one for myself.
Yeah, that's super cool. I like that.
Okay, so change control. See how well this bridge was thought out? Look at the change control in this bridge.
Yeah, I wouldn't drive my car over that.
Yeah, they didn't plan very well, and they kind of made it up, didn't they?
Yeah,
So change control is important, and this is often the second most cause of failures of a project is change in scope. Well, gee, we can do this and just add something more to it. Well, pretty soon that builds up, or maybe that wasn't as simple as we thought it was, and by the time we analyzed it and designed it, it was a lot more complicated, you know. Sometimes changes in scope occurs because projects, as we know, aren't something we've ever done before, and we run into something, as you mentioned, and we have to handle it, right? Maybe we thought we could design it one way and discover it doesn't work that way. We have to redesign it a different way, okay? And of course, it all impacts the cost, the schedule, material, and in some cases, you may not have the skills you need to deal with it. You may have to financially buy that skill set someplace to finish that particular thing. And of course, my mantra, risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's important, but again, it's important to have a process. It's important up front to have a change control process that you say, this is what we're going to do for change control. Who can recommend a change? Who can approve it? Who has to determine whether it's financially feasible? All those things should be done up front as far as the project methodology on how this project's going to work. Okay, so in this company, we had kind of a standard over thing where we had a gatekeeper and then a accountable business manager, and those two people were responsible for change control. Okay, and they had the dollar and cent authority to change the budget if necessary. Okay, now this being a very big project, it was actually had to be authorized by the senior management team of the board. So there was some leeway, but if it got beyond a certain point, then the board had to get involved.
Right.
Okay, so but that's the change control, is you have to have that process ahead of time. And this company did a lot of projects, and so they had kind of an overview of how change control works. But if you're a small company and just doing projects once in a while, then each project needs to come up with, okay, how are we going to do change control? And you don't want to decide that when you get there.
Right.
You know, you kind of want to know up front how you want to do that, and who can make the determination, right?
Right.
And part of that is feasibility. Is it feasible? You know, not just the fact that we can do it, is it really feasible? Because when you design the project in the first place, you set out your goal. What are you going to accomplish, right? We talked about the objectives. And is this change enhancing the objectives, or is it skewing us from the objectives? So, termination. We're done. Project project's over. Well, it's not. One of the things my father told me when I wanted to start flying, he says, you're ready to take off when the gross weight of the paperwork equals the gross weight of the airplane. So, in a project, you have to have a closure, okay? And the first closure is, okay, what was our schedule and budget? How well did we do? Okay? And the fact that we're done. Do we meet the objectives? Okay? Part of that is, when we set the objectives, we have to determine when we did it. So we're going to increase sales by 12% after 1 year. Well, when we close the project, we have to wait a year before we find that out. In some projects, 2 years. So we have to have a process to terminate the project and be able to say, okay, were we successful? Did we meet our objective? Did we meet our goal? And if not, what do we do about it? Okay? Is there something we can tweak? Or do we just write it off and say, sorry, we didn't get there from here, right? It's real important, because that's what management wanted in the first place, right? Or your client, is they wanted something, and did you deliver that? And just because the work is done on the project doesn't mean the project's really over. Okay? You still have to go back at some point and say, we made it. And you won't always know right away. So we can't do justice for project management, in a couple hours. It takes a lot. A lot of what we talked about really goes into the methodology and setting up project management. And of course, there are manuals and books. And there's the PMI, Project Management Institute, that thinks they own project management, except they go skewy. A lot of good information is available, and a lot of it's online. The challenge is, as a project manager to take that and be able to apply it, and that's the secret. So next month we're going to talk about different kinds of tools that will help you work those assessments and manage the project and control it. And then the following month we'll hope to do a little project. Still haven't figured that one out yet, but we're working on it. We only have an hour to do a project, right? But we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Right. Cool.
So, questions at this point? You follow what a dashboard is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's just a
I'm not
graphical
used to
representation.
What is a dashboard? Say that again.
What's the dashboard?
It's just you add visuals to what it's basically a way of tracking
Well,
project
I
visuals.
define a dashboard as a graphical
Okay.
presentation. Okay, you can have your verbiage in your report, but the dashboard is a quick look at where you are.
Right.
So you have your cost, your schedule, your different pieces of your project that you're trying to manage, and then in your reports, you delineate all the actual things, but you can show graphically where you are with the budget, where you are with the schedule. You don't have to use a Gantt chart. That's for management. That's for project manager control. But you can make a real simple chart to present to management that kind of shows what it is, right? And there's hundreds of ways to do that. What I challenge project managers is to be creative, like this map.
Yeah.
Create something that really, oh boy, it shows. So, cartoons, line graphs, bar graphs, Another good one is like a speedometer type graph, you know.
Yeah.
Those are really cool, especially if they're moving.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So I apologize, I wasn't quite sure when I put this together whether it would take
How the
an
time
hour
goes.
or whatever, but
So in your experience, you come alongside a company to project manage for that company, and sometimes are you using resources like people within that company? A lot of times when you project manage for them, or are you bringing in outside teams usually to do that?
well, yes. Again, you know, depending upon the kind of project you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I was doing software development, I had a team of software developers, and that's what they did. They worked on the project. Okay, they were internal to the company. In the other case, if you got a small company and you're trying to use people's times while they're doing their job,
Right.
you know, that's a little bit risky, but it's doable. But you have to plan that impact,
Yeah.
right? Certainly, if you have somebody in the company who is key from a technology standpoint, they have the specific skill set you need, and they have their daytime job too.
Right.
You gotta use that, because you may not be able to find that skill set easily off
Yeah.
in a labor market, right?
Yeah. What is your take on people's resistance to change? Because usually when you're doing a project, you're probably ushering in some kind of change. Do you think people are resistant to change, or is it just that we don't do a great job communicating change, and that's why people get bent out of shape, or what's been your experience?
That's an excellent question, because that is always a challenge. Yes, people are resistant to change. They really are,
Yeah.
especially in the workplace. You know, and so part of the job of a project manager is kind of the human nature aspect
Mhm.
of dealing with people, right? Making sure you take care of that aspect. You know, I've seen a couple of projects totally fail because the people didn't want to change.
Right.
You know, you got to prepare them for it. And if you think about it, things change all the time. Every day, something's changing in your life. You know, every day. So you know, project management is change management. You know, you're changing something. That's the whole point.
Right.
And you know, you got to get buy-in. You know, and one of the things we'll talk about is next week in the tool, or next month in the tool, is getting that buy-in from your stakeholders to say, you know, I know on this project, for example, one of the stakeholders would go to a meeting and he'd agree. Okay, this is what we're going to do, right? But you didn't want to do that,
Mhm.
you know, and then all of a sudden the resources that I thought I had were non-existent, you know, and you know, finally we had to deal with that on a more professional basis. But people are resistant to change, and you have to know which ones they are, and one, queue them up, and two, kind of monitor them,
Right.
because they could make it go south in a hurry,
Right. Right.
especially if they have any influence in the company.
Right.
You know, I was working on a project for King County Metro once, and you know, it was going just fine until one of the key stakeholders, who had a lot of influence, says, I don't want to do that, I want to do this.
Project's done, pretty much.
Well, we shifted gears,
Yeah.
you know, and it was not the right thing to do, but you know, the person had a lot of influence,
Right.
and you know, it came out of the blue,
Mhm.
you know, and he'd been a key participant in the company for a long time, and people looked up to him as the expert, and you know,
Not much you can do at that point.
not much you can do about that point.
Yeah.
But if you know, and I didn't see it coming, because up until then, you know, he was on board with stuff and things
Right.
were going well.
Right.
That happens.
Yeah.
So as a project manager, how do you deal with things that, changes like that are not the right thing to do?
Well, you really have to, you know, have a self-assessment and say, okay, what are you going to do? And you know, you've got to go to the leadership team and lay it out, right? And in some cases, you know, you either you deal with it or you walk away.
Okay.
Okay. In this particular case, I walked away.
But you voiced your concern.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and I knew by forcing the issue, you know, that I was not going to be acceptable anymore.
Sorry,
But-
this might be it's my daughter, it might be an emergency call.
So, you know, you have to be willing to walk away in a
take that
case
risk.
like that.
Okay.
Because if you don't, the end result is they get what they want, but it's not what they need.
Right.
And then because it's not what they need, it doesn't work the way that it should. And guess who gets the blame? The project manager,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Okay. And that's a precarious position to be in because and that comes with the territory as being a project manager,
Okay.
right? It happens. And you have to be aware of that, you know. It's human nature.
So if you were to pick like one thing that undercuts or makes property managers fail most frequently, what have you seen is a common pitfall for property managers? Maybe the risk.
The biggest pitfall is the biggest pitfall, in my opinion, is risk management. Okay.
Too optimistic that they can get things done.
People are too optimistic, and yeah, we can do this in 3 days, and you know, whatever. You get that optimistic. You gotta be careful with pessimistic too.
Mm-hmm.
But it's optimistic to say, oh yeah, we can do that. That's easy, you know, and we can do it for X dollars, right?
Right.
Okay, and then when you start getting into it, you know, you're not even close.
Right.
Okay, to me that's the biggest risk, and the way you overcome that is you sit down and really define your process, you define the project, and get buy-in on that, you know, let's be realistic.
Right.
The second is change control, okay? People want something different while you're in the process, and that's inevitable.
Yeah.
And I was doing a project for a software company, and I took over the project. It had already been underway, and the developers, you know, were the worst in change control. They kept saying, "Oh, gee, if I do this, we could this. You can have this feature. We can," and they keep adding features, you know.
Yeah.
And finally, you know, you have to put a stake in the ground and say, "Okay, this is what we've got to deliver. This is the definition. This is it. We can enhance it later, but we got to deliver."
Right.
Because otherwise it's a moving target. You'll never finish.
Yeah.
Right? And that's extremely bad.
Yeah. My brother works for a company that's a little bit dysfunctional, and one of the main dysfunctions is the discrepancy between the sales force and then the delivery team or whatever. So the sales force will go out and sell something that then they hand off to a project manager to actually go do, and what they've sold is not possible within the time frame or whatever. There's a disconnect between those two branches of the company. Is that a common thing that you've seen?
And the project manager is always the one that gets blamed.
Right, exactly.
You know? They get left holding the bag, you know, and it's inevitable. That's why I mentioned earlier, you know, at points you got to be willing to walk away because you're going to get blamed for it.
Right.
And you know, if somebody wants something in a project and it's just not doable, and you can't get them to understand that, you know, and often things start up front, okay, because we talked about the objective. Well, remember we talked about defining it well. Well, if you don't define it well, okay, then you're already starting off on the wrong foot because you're not quite sure what it is you're going to deliver. And so when you get to the end, you say we accomplished what was it we were gonna accomplish, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, it's, as we mentioned last month, you know, it's hard to take all this project management methodology and scale it for the size of the projects. But there are some key things, as we talked about, that really any project has to have. You gotta have a good defined objective,
Right.
right? You gotta have a good plan. You know, and, you know, if it's a short project, maybe reporting and dashboards aren't as important.
Right.
The longer project it is. But again, when you terminate a project, I don't care how big or small it is, did we accomplish it? Did we get what we wanted out of it, you know? And if not, why? And it's the project manager.
Yeah.
So this project was actually 7 projects, and I was the program manager, so I had 7 project managers reporting to me, and they're all related, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to get them all to come in, you know, together.
Right.
It was really interesting.
Yeah. But it worked out.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Actually, it did. We 2 guys and I started planned the project over the weekend, and we came up with a plan. It was a 2-year plan for $60 million, and we finished it in 2 years and 59,800,000 or something. You know, we were just, you know,
Yeah.
and you talk about, you know, people resisting change. Well, my manager at the time, this is my customer. My manager was over here, and she didn't like that. She thought, you know, but then her boss had to report to senior management team on all the projects going on in the company, and the only one that was on time and on budget was this one.
Nice.
So sometimes you find yourself between a rock and a hard spot as a project manager. You got your customer to satisfy, but you know, sometimes you have a project team manager that, you know, is
Right.
trying to drive you other ways too, you know, and how do you maneuver that?
Yeah. Carefully, I guess.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think we'll have a lot of fun with tools next month.
Yeah, that should be fun. I'm looking forward to seeing what those are.